By now, you've probably heard the news that the Rokeby Venus by Diego Velázquez was attacked by two climate activists a few days ago. This is, I think, the fifth, though there might be more. As I was doing some research for this, I found another instance of similar kind of antics that Just Stop Oil uses. I'm not sure if this was Just Stop Oil or another climate activist, but these climate activists glued their hands to the glass of a Sandro Botticelli painting. And what's really remarkable to me is the sense that this is an escalating phenomenon, that it's escalating. It went from just gluing your hand to the glass to now smashing the glass. And it seems to me that the next stage will be actually harming the artwork itself. Now, that's not to say that this artwork hasn't been harmed. I think that people who want to defend these climate protesters, climate activists, will say that they only smashed the glass, they didn't smash the painting. However, I just find it almost impossible to believe that that little shards of glass didn't scratch the painting, and that the force of the hammer, smashing the glass and the glass then smashing into the painting did not do some damage. I think it's very likely that it did. It is not beyond the press at this point to run cover for the actions of left-wing extremists, and I wouldn't be surprised if the tomato soup that has been poured on Van Gogh and Vermeer, or the mashed potatoes that were flung at the Monet have not actually, done some actual damage. I did read that the mashed potatoes thrown at the Monet had not caused damage. It says that specifically in this CNN article, but this Monet apparently did not have glass covering it. And they said that the glaze alone, that this painting was glazed and therefore it was protected. It was not damaged by the mashed potatoes. I just find that really hard to believe. And again, my concern is the escalation of these acts. So again, just going from gluing your hand to the glass to actually smashing the glass, this is a big jump. And the Rokeby Venus was actually physically attacked long time ago by I believe they're called suffragettes, the sort of first wave of feminist activists. It was slashed with a razor, I believe, and they were able to repair it, thankfully. But these climate activists cited that instance right before or right after they had smashed the glass, citing it as an instance of, women didn't get the vote by voting, which I think they meant to say that they needed to resort to extreme actions like slashing the art to get rights. And I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that if this painting had not been slashed by a feminist activist, I don't think that would have had really any bearing on whether or not women eventually were going to secure their rights. But isn't that ominous? It's ominous that they are citing an act of violence. And I do think that violence towards art is violence. That they're citing an act of violence in this sort of foreshadowing way and saying that was justified because it was necessary. Again, that's the sort of rhetoric that we hear when there are more grievous injuries that people plan to deal out, whether to people or objects or whatever. So let's just kind of do a recap of what Just Stop Oil has attacked in the last year or two or whatever it's been. So they've attacked Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers by pouring tomato soup on them. They attacked a copy of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, a painting believed to have been made by Leonardo da Vinci's students. They attacked Johannes Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring, also with tomato soup, and the Monet. There was the Monet that they threw mashed potatoes at. And now the Rokeby Venus by Diego Velázquez. As a side note, the destruction of public monuments is definitely a related issue, but it's a thorny issue, and so I think I want to cover it in a separate video, but it is interesting to bear in mind that that's also going on at the same time. So, what is not being attacked, or what are not being attacked, are artworks from non Western cultures. And in fact, it's actually really difficult to even imagine any of these climate activists targeting a non Western example of art in a museum, even though there are many examples of non Western artworks that people go to museums to view, and supposedly the idea here is just that they want to shock us by destroying or seeming to destroy something beautiful. So that could apply to the artwork of non-Western cultures as well, but they have so far refrained from attacking anything that is non-Western. Everything is Western. So I think what we can draw from that is that they perceive that the West is at fault for climate change. Now, I think we all know that China and other developing nations, or maybe China has developed now, but China and other nations that are non-Western have a huge amount of emissions, and probably are responsible for the majority of emissions these days. And but I don't think that they're going to be attacking any Chinese artworks in museums. The feeling that the West is to blame for climate change seems to be related to the idea that the West industrialized first. So maybe that we spread industrialization. That industrialization is basically can be linked to Western culture. But I think more particularly, it's consumerism and capitalism, which are definitely linked to not just the West, but the era of European colonialism. So if you think about that, I mean, the idea seems to be that the West is responsible for climate change more so than China or other developing nations, because the West invented industrialization alongside consumerism and capitalism. These are like intrinsic to Western culture, and they're like evil in a way that economies in other societies are not. That capitalism as functioning within Western society is a sort of a unique evil compared with whatever kind of market economies have existed in other places and times and exist today. But really, in particular, I think that it's interesting to consider the feelings and attitudes of people towards the art styles that flourished in the West at the time of European colonialism. So that would be the Baroque and Neoclassical. So I would say, and this is from my own personal experience of being like a rowdy teenager who was into punk rock and very counterculture and anti-establishment, that we tended to view the Baroque and Neoclassical as the epitome of hypocrisy. These high-minded ideals that produced this high-minded culture that nevertheless went on to enslave people and take advantage of people in the colonial era, the imperial era. This sort of counterculture orientation began in earnest in the 1960s, accelerated through the 1970s, and then by the 1980s had become really mainstream in certain ways. If you look at punk rock and heavy metal as counterculture expressions from the culture that go against the mainstream culture, that sort of, I think the allegation that punk rock and heavy metal have the pronouncement they make on the larger Western culture, that they come from is a condemnation. And that condemnation probably has a lot to do with the feeling of being an underdog, the feeling of not being able to succeed within a structure, within like modern American or European sort of structures of government, of economy. And I think it's a very complicated thing. I'm being too broad here. But there's another line of development that was going on at the same time within academia, and that is the development of academic disciplines, like the various types of critical theories, post-colonialism, and the various sorts of doctrines of intersectionality. And these sort of lent a theoretical framework, a very high-minded, high-sounding, intellectual-sounding framework that justifies the cultural orientation of the various types of countercultures that had been evolving since the 1960s. So what I am trying to say is that there is a large coalition today of a variety of anti-Western forces or anti-Western ideologies, anti-Western subcultures, countercultures, or cultures that have, like I said, come together in a coalition. And whether it is Just Stop Oil attacking Western art, or like mobs of people tearing down statues that they think are related to slavery, that in some cases have been actually abolitionists that they've pulled down, or other people who just happen to be from Western culture from before the time when Western culture was widely reviled. There's this very large coalition, big tent of anti-Western orientation that I predict will continue to cause damage to art and iconoclasm in this sort of symbolic destruction. And yeah, we can basically expect to see more of this unless the West stands up for itself and takes active measures to prevent it. And it doesn't seem inclined to. So I think it's incumbent upon us all to start thinking about the lengths that we are willing to go to protect our shared heritage and our art that so many people value. Art deserves a vigorous defense, not just a lukewarm defense, not just a mediocre sort of mumbled defense. It needs a loud and vigorous defense. It deserves that. We deserve that, because when somebody robs us of an artwork, they're not just destroying a beautiful thing. They're literally robbing all of humanity of something that makes us richer to possess. Anyway, those are my thoughts on this. I want to make another video about statues and public monuments. And in that one, I actually want to talk a lot about non-Western art, which I am, there are several cultures, non-Western cultures, that I'm a huge fan of in terms of their artistic production. And I think there are some really interesting parallels that we can make between how public monuments and statues are being viewed right here, right now, today, versus how we tend to view ancient public statues and monuments. And yeah, I think we can have an interesting conversation about that. If you appreciate my content, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot while I try to grow this channel, and I really appreciate it if you do.